And then I was at a fundraiser for the King County Library Systems called Literary Lions. They do it every spring. In fact, I was just at it last night in Bellevue. And they have 35 writers and 35 tables, and they ring a bell after every course, and the writers move tables. It's a great deal of fun. It's a big thing. But they feed all the authors ahead of time. So I was at the pre-author dinner, and I was sitting at a table with other writers. We were introducing ourselves, and it came around to me. And I said, "Hi, my name is Garth." And I'm really frustrated because I have this book, and I think it's really good, but it's narrated by a dog, and no agent will touch it. And this other writer sitting across the table from me looked up from his plate and he said, "Oh, hey, you know, you should call my agent. He sold my book, and it's narrated by a crow." This is a true story. Lane Mayhew wrote a book called Song of the Crow, about a crow that stows away on Noah's Ark. So I got his agent's information, and I sent him my pages by email on the following Monday. And 2 days later, he called me up, and he was crying. And he said, I love this book, I love this dog, you have to let me represent this. And so then, that was what that guy needed. And so he went, we did a little bit of work on it, he had some good ideas, we worked a little bit, and then he sold it to my great publisher, Harper, 50 weeks after I started writing it that summer. So 2 weeks short of a year that I started writing it, he sold it, and now it's gone on. It's we spent 158 weeks on the New York Times bestseller. That's over 3 years on the New York Times bestseller list, 35 languages. Thus proving that people will read a book narrated by a dog. I want to read another passage for you. That I've always enjoyed this passage, so I hope you do too. The indignities of aging is just horrible. And I haven't even gotten incontinent yet. I can only imagine what that's all about. I just can't find a focal length that actually works for me. Sorry, that was inappropriate. Pretend. Can you erase that part?
Okay.
No one else is going to remember, but the internet remembers everything. Young people, remember that. Her name was Eve, and at first I resented how she changed our lives. I resented the attention Denny paid to her small hands, her plump round buttocks, her modest hips. The way he gazed into her soft green eyes, which peered out from under stylish strands of straight blonde hair. Did I envy her engaging smile that eclipsed anything about her that might have been considered less than special? Perhaps I did. For she was a person unlike me. She was well-groomed unlike me. She was everything I wasn't. I went for extended periods without a haircut or a bath, for instance. She bathed every day and had a special person do nothing else but color her hair to Denny's liking. My nails grew too long and scratched the wood floor. She frequently attended to her nails with sticks and clippers and polishes to make sure they were the proper shape and size. Her attention to every detail of her appearance was reflected in her personality as well. She was an incredible organizer, fastidious in nature, constantly making lists and jotting down notes of things to do, things to be done or gotten or assembled, frequently creating what she called honey-do lists for Denny and me so that our weekends were filled with trips to the Home Depot or waiting in line at the disposal and recycling transfer station in Georgetown. I didn't like painting rooms and fixing doorknobs and washing screens, but Denny liked it apparently, because the more she gave him to do, the more quickly he completed his tasks so he could collect his reward, which usually included a lot of nuzzling and stroking. Soon after she moved into our apartment, they were married in a small wedding ceremony which I attended along with a group of their closest friends and Eve's immediate family. Denny didn't have any brothers or sisters to invite, and he explained his parents' absence simply by saying they didn't travel well. Eve's parents made it clear to all involved that the house in which the wedding took place, a charming little beach cottage on Whidbey Island, was owned by close friends of theirs who were not in attendance. I was allowed to participate only under strict rules. I was not to roam freely on the beach or swim in the bay, as I might track sand onto the expensive mahogany floors. And I was forced to urinate and defecate in a very specific location next to the recycling containers. Upon our return from Whidbey, I noticed that Eve moved through our apartment with a greater sense of authorship and was much bolder in her actions to move or replace things, towels, linens, and even furniture. She had entered our lives and changed everything around. And yet, while I was unhappy with her intrusion, there was something about her that prevented me from mustering any real anger. I believed that thing was her swollen belly. There was something about the effort it took for her to lie down on her side to rest, having removed her shirt and undergarments, the way her breasts fell just so across her chest as she lay on the bed. It reminded me of my own mother. At mealtime, when she sighed and shrugged herself to the ground, lifting her legs to expose her nipples to us. These are the devices I use to feed you. Now eat. And while I greatly resented the attention Eve lavished on her unborn baby, in retrospect, I realized I had never given her a reason to lavish that same attention on me. Perhaps that is my regret. I loved how she was when she was pregnant, and yet I knew I could never be the source of her affection in that way because I could never be her child. She devoted herself to the baby before it was even born. She touched it regularly through her tightly stretched skin. She sang to it and danced with it to music she played on the stereo. She learned to make it move around by drinking orange juice, which she did frequently, explaining to me that the health magazines demanded she drink the juice for the folic acid, but she and I both knew she was doing it for the kick. She once asked if I wanted to know how it felt, and I did. So she held my face against her belly after she had drunk the acid. And I felt it move. An elbow, I think, pushing out perversely, like something reaching out from the grave. It was hard for me to imagine exactly what was going on behind the curtain, inside Eve's magic sack where the little rabbit was being assembled. But I knew that what was inside of her was separate from her and had a will of its own and moved when it wanted to or when prodded by the acid and was beyond her control. I admired the female sex, the life makers. It must be amazing to have a body that can carry an entire creature inside. I mean, other than a tapeworm, which I've had. That doesn't count as another life, really. That's a parasite and never should have been there in the first place. The life that Eve had inside her was something she had made. She and Denny had made it together. I wished at the time that the baby would look like me. See how complex your relationship with your dog really is, right? All right, second most frequently asked question I want to tell you real quick, and then I want to talk about a couple things, and then I'm going to. Oh, no, you don't have to worry about what's going to happen. You're all happy. Second most frequently asked question I get: where did the name Enzo come from? Do we have any? Ferrari. Enzo Ferrari, of course. The great car manufacturer and designer, you know, the famous Ferrari, the famous red, the prancing horse on the hood. Famous red cars that I'm sure every Saturday night are driving up and down Lewis Avenue. I used that line in Miami Beach once and no one laughed. Yes, of course. Obviously, a race car driver. Denny is a race car driver. It makes obvious sense that he would name his dog Enzo after Enzo Ferrari, the great car manufacturer. But you know, I have to confess something to you. When I first started writing this book, Enzo was not named Enzo. When I first started writing this book, Enzo was named Juan Pablo. What? I mean, Juan Pablo Montoya. Great champion, a great champion driver. And I thought this is a terrific name for him. You know, I could play with it as a writer. You know, Juan Pablo, JP. I could make Pope John Paul jokes. Maybe they wouldn't have been funny, but I could have made them. So I remember I told you I went off to Oregon, and after I begged my wife to let me start the new book, and she said, I want to see 40 pages. I didn't get her 40 pages. I got her 39 pages. So I got close, and I gave them to her to read after that weekend, and she said, go with it. Keep going. You're onto something. I said, that's great. Thank you so much. And she said, yeah, there's just one thing. You can't name the dog Juan Pablo. And I said, why not? She said, it doesn't ring. It doesn't sing. It's not a good name for a dog. You're going to have to find a better name for the dog. So at the time, I've already indicated, at the time we had 2 sons, and we were thinking about having a 3rd kid. And I wanted to have a little girl. Because I had the guy thing, you know, guys are kind of hairy and smelly and all that. I wanted to have the little girl experience. You know how little girls are. They're so cute. They have long blonde hair, and they wear their little white dresses, and they skip through the fields barefoot, scooping up armfuls of wildflowers that they give to their father as they sit on his lap and coo in his ear. I I wanted that experience. But you see, I understand that we're not always in charge of such things, and that maybe there was a chance that if we did have another kid, it would turn out to be another boy. And so I just wanted to make it clear to my wife when we were thinking about this. I said, you understand, I have naming rights on, if it's a boy, I got naming rights on this one. So if we do have another boy, we're going to name him Enzo. Because nobody can beat a kid named Enzo. Stein. I mean, just nobody can beat a kid named Enzo. I mean, on the playground, I mean, he would beat everybody at tetherball, trust me. He would rock. He would totally rock it. And my wife said to me, and this is a quote, she said to me, "There's no way on God's green earth we are naming a child Enzo Stein." Now, those of you, we've been married 21 years. Those of you who have been in long-term relationships, I'm sure you know what I mean when I say that there are often ups and downs. There are speed bumps in life that we go through, little bumps we have to get over. We work through them, and we're stronger. Our relationship is stronger if we're getting through these problems. It's all good. But I do have to admit, there was a great deal of contention about the naming rights of our yet-to-be-conceived child. So I gave her those pages, and she said, "You can't name the dog Juan Pablo." And I said, "You're probably right, but what should I name the dog?" And she thought, and she thought, and she thought, and she said, "Oh, I know. Why don't you name the dog Enzo?" And I said, "That's actually a great idea, a great name, but I can't do that because I can't name. We're going to name our son, if we have another boy, we're going to name him Enzo. And honey, you know very well, if we have a kid named Enzo, I can't name a character in a book Enzo." And she said, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that." Well, she was right as always, and Enzo was the right name for the dog, and so I did go with that. And we did have another child, and he did turn out to be a boy. And no, we did not name him Juan Pablo. We named him Dashiell, after Dashiell Hammett, of course. And so yes, it all turns out well in the end. But I have to admit, I feel a little manipulated by the system. I want to just mention a couple things here about what do you do after you write a book narrated by a dog? Your publisher wants you to write a book narrated by a cat. Preferably one obsessed with flight and wants to fly a small plane. And I couldn't do that. So I had to do something else. If you look at the 4 books that I've written, there's a kind of a thematic trajectory to them. And I'm starting to work on my new book, so it's carrying forward even more. So it makes sense to me, though there are no dogs in my new book, A Sudden Light. Thematically, I think you will find it's another step along a line that I'm trying to make relevant in something called a career. A Sudden Light is a multi-generational family saga set against the Northwest timber industry. If you're going to talk about the history of the Northwest, you have to talk about trees. And so it has a lot to do with the beginnings of Seattle in flashback. Most of the bulk of the story takes place in the present day. But it's 5 generations of a once extremely wealthy timber family since fallen from grace. And all they have left is this gigantic mansion on a bluff overlooking Puget Sound. That may or may not be haunted. So it's a book about fathers and sons and how that relationship ripples through generations of the family. And it's a book about our connection with nature, about our relationship with trees and with the world around us. And there's a lot, it dips into the history and so forth of which we're coming into next year is going to be the centennial of the national parks and so forth. So there's stuff about the movement around the turn of the 20th century where conservation was taking over, led by Teddy Roosevelt and his forestry lieutenant, Gifford Pinchot. Little known fact, Gifford Pinchot married his dead fiancée. That's right. He was engaged to be married. She died of tuberculosis, and he married her anyway. And for years, sat at a table for her at dinner every night and had long conversations with her, go for long strolls with her. And nobody thought twice about it. Well, they probably did, but no one said anything. Because there was a different relationship people had with sort of spirituality in the turn of the 20th century. And this is Gifford Pinchot, a very wealthy family, and he was Teddy Roosevelt's forestry lieutenant for a long time, and there's a huge, gigantic national forest in Washington State named after him. So this is a very credible person. But it's the idea that in certain eras we did have much more forward-thinking way of looking at the spirit world and our connection with that. So that's a lot of that is in here. So really what the book for me is about is seeing the unseen, peeling back the layers, and trying to understand that those things that we use, we toss off a lot of these phrases like luck and coincidence as if things are random occurrences just because we don't know what made it happen. But if you start looking at the really advanced scientists and string theory and unified field theories and all these sorts of things, you're talking, you want to get Stephen Hawking into a conversation, you're talking 18 dimensions, you're not talking 4. So we just can't see them all. So how do we know that certain things don't happen for very specific reasons that we just can't fathom yet? And so if we take that approach, maybe we see the world a little bit differently. So it's my interpretation of a ghost story, meaning that it's not scary. Maybe there's a little bit of creepy, but it's not the haunting of Hill House. And in fact, I just want to read you, I want to set it up for you just so you see. The bulk of the story takes place in 1990. It's being told by an adult who is telling his children about what happened to him when he was a kid. So there's a little bit of a lens. So you remember 1990? So, you do, right? I mean, it was the cusp of the digital revolution, you know? Everybody knew a guy with a cell phone, but it was really big and he never turned it on because the roaming charges were too expensive. And there weren't all these video games and all this kind of stuff, and there weren't Xboxes, and there weren't, maybe some guy had one of those Atari deals, but it was very early going. And I did that for a reason. I wanted this to be sort of a pure, innocent age. And here, let me explain it to you. Let me just read you this paragraph. 20-some years ago, before technology changed the world and terrorism struck fear into the hearts of all citizens, before boys in trench coats stalked and murdered classrooms full of innocent children in schools across this fair land, before the oceans were thick with oil slicks and the government ceased to govern, and Bill Gates set out to love the world to death, and hurricanes became powerful enough to stagger entire cities, and toxic children were drugged into oblivion to drive up the profits of big pharma, and genetically modified foodstuffs were forced upon us without us knowing we needed to care, before smoking marijuana and gay marriages became passé, before gay people became just like anyone else, and weed became just another source of tax revenue. This was even before another famous Bill, the one surnamed Clinton, became famous for his choice of cigars. It seems like ages ago, looking back on it, no smartphones, no on-demand, nary an iPad in sight. So long ago, yes, this story begins in 1990. Oh, so, check it out. Check it out if you want. I mean, I like it. And look, I always said, it's a deal. You know, we have a deal. Writers and readers have a deal. It's a conversation. An unread book, I always say, an unread book is nothing more than a colorful doorstop. Until it is read, until it is interpreted, until someone takes it in, it has no meaning. So the dialogue is the process, is the artistic work, where the art happens is in interpreting. And every reader will interpret things differently through his or her own values and experiences and ideals. And so nobody's wrong. That's what's so great about community reads programs or book clubs and that sort of thing, is you can all say, well, I got this and I got that. Oh, I didn't even notice that part, but I really got this part. Because we all plug into things differently because of things that have happened to us in our past, and we identify more or less with certain characters or certain events. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, what was it what I was trying to say? Oh, yeah. I'm asking a lot from you to buy a book. You got to put your money down, of course, or wait online for the library. But then I need more than that. I need something more important than that. I need your time. I need your attention. You can't wash dishes while you're reading. You can wash dishes while you're watching American Idol. You can't wash dishes while you're reading. You have to devote yourself to it to take it in. And so I'm asking you to give me your time and attention. And I have to respect that. So I always said I would never put out a book, I would never allow a book to be published that I've written that isn't the best book I could ever possibly have written. If I can't look you in the eye and actually say that, then it's not done yet, and I got to keep working on it. So I actually, About a Sudden Light, do feel that that's the best book I've ever written. And you know what, I hate to break it to you, but the next book I write, it's going to be better. But that's That's okay. That's part of the deal. So, but the thing is, I have some of these postcards. You should check them out. We did a website just for asuddenlight.com, and it has like an artist's rendering of the North Estate, which is the main location. And if you hover over the different areas, you can get a drop-down menu and click into it and learn more about certain topics in the book that come up in the book that I didn't have time to put in. About the conservation, paranormal, spirituality, these sorts of things. Also about tree climbing. There's tree climbing in the book. I wanted to get to the top of a tree because I wanted to know these log and timbermen and stuff. What did it feel like up there? And so there's a guy in Oregon who was he has Tree Climbing Planet. Is his name is name of him. It's his company, but he's the only guy there. And he teaches people how to recreationally climb trees using you use ropes and you take a crossbow and you shoot a thing up, and then you use ascenders and a saddle. So I've done it several times, including last summer. I climbed an 800-year-old redwood tree in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and I wore one of those little deals, GoPro things. And so there's on this website there's a 3-minute video if you want to check it out. It's pretty amazing. If you get a chance to do it, I encourage you to, because it's well, you watch the video and you'll see the branches at the top of a redwood tree are huge, huge. You would think they would get small at the top. They're big at the top, they're small at the bottom, because that's how it kind of clones itself as it goes. It's really a fascinating ecology, and in fact, I highly recommend, if you're interested in that kind of the redwoods and how they work, I recommend that you read a book called The Wild Trees by Richard Preston. It's fantastic. He follows these researchers who were the first ones who went up into the trees in the 80s and did this canopy work. And it's really quite fascinating. I want to read one more passage if I can. You guys okay? And then if we have time, we'll do some questions and answers. I just want to leave you with this, because this is always a good one to, this is a good way to leave off always. This is from later in the book of the Art of Racing in the Rain, and the only thing you need to know about this, I guess, is that, oh, you don't need to know anything. Here we go. This takes place at a little racetrack in California. Denny told me to get in the front seat of his car and sit, which I did. They wrapped the sheet over me, pressing me to the seat, leaving only my head sticking out. They somehow secured the sheet tightly from behind. Too tight, Denny asked? I was too excited to reply. He was going to take me out in his car. Denny walked around to the driver's side. He took his helmet out of the back seat and squeezed it onto his head. He got into the car and put on his seatbelt. 1 bark means slower, 2 means faster. Got it? I barked twice. The paddock at Thunder Hill Raceway Park is tucked between 2 long parallel straights. The rest of the course fans out from the paddock area like butterfly wings. We cruised very slowly through the hot pit area to the track entrance. We're going to take it easy, Denny said, and off we went. Being on a track was a new experience for me. No buildings, no signs, no sense of proportion. It was like running through a field, gliding over a plain. Denny shifted smoothly, but I noticed he drove more aggressively than he did on the street. He revved the car much higher and his braking was much harder. I'm finding my visuals, he explained to me. Turn-in points, braking. Some guys drive more by feel. They get in a rhythm and trust it, but I'm very visual. Around the turns we went, he noted his apexes and exits for my benefit. Down the straights, we picked up speed. We weren't going very fast, maybe 60, but I really felt the speed around the turns when the tires made a hollow, ghostly sound, almost like an owl. I felt special being with Denny on the racetrack. He had never taken me out on a track before. I felt sure and relaxed. Being held firmly to the seat was comforting. The windows were open, and the wind was fresh and cold. I could have driven like that all day. After 3 laps, he looked over at me. Brakes are warm, he said. Tires are warm. I didn't understand what he was getting at. You want to try a hot lap? A hot lap? I barked twice. Denny laughed. Sing out if you don't like it, he said. 1 long howl. He firmly pressed the accelerator to the floor. There's nothing like it. The sensation of speed, nothing in the world can compare. It was the sudden acceleration, not Jim's bedsheet, that kept me pinned to the seat as we gathered speed and flew down the first straight. Hold on now, Denny said. We're taking this at speed. Fast we went, hurtling, faster. I watched the turn approach, scream at us, until we were practically past it, and then he was off the accelerator and hard on the brakes. The nose of the car dove, and then I was thankful for the sheet, because without it, I would have been thrown against the windshield. Slow, slow, slow. The brake pads held the rotors as tightly as they could, burning from the friction, the heat being thrown off the calipers, the energy dissipating. And then he cranked the wheel left, and so smoothly but without pause, he was back on the gas, and we were pushing through the turn, the G-forces shoving us toward the outside of the track, but the tires holding us in place. They were not hooting, those tires. No, the owl was dead. The tires were screeching. They were shouting, howling, crying in pain. He relaxed on the wheel of the apex, and the car drifted toward the exit, and he was full on the gas, and we flew out of that turn and toward the next, and the next after that. 15 turns at Thunder Hill. 15. And I love them all equally. I adore them all. Each one is different, but each with its own particular sensation, but each so magnificent. Around the track, we went faster and faster, lap after lap. You okay? He asked, looking over at me as we sped nearly 120 miles per hour down the back straight, and I barked twice. I'm going to use up my tires if you keep me out here, he said. One more lap. Yes, one more lap. One more lap. Forever one more lap. I live my life for one more lap. I give my life for one more lap. Please, God, give me one more lap. And that lap was spectacular. I lifted my eyes as Denny instructed. Big eyes, far eyes, he said to me. Those reference points, the visuals he had identified when we walked the track, moved by so quickly it took me some time to realize that he was not even seeing them. He was living them. He had programmed the map of the racecourse into his brain. With every breath he adjusted, he reassessed, he corrected, but he did it all subconsciously. I saw then how, in a race, he could plot now to pass another driver 3 or 4 laps later. His thinking, his strategies, his mind. All of Denny unfolded for me that day. After a cool-down lap, we pulled into the paddock and the entire crew was waiting. They surrounded the car and their hands released me from the harness and I leapt to the tarmac. Did you like it? One of them asked me, and I barked. Yes, I barked and jumped in the air. Oh, you were hauling ass out there, Pat said to Denny. We got a real racer on the set. Well, Denny explained with a laugh. Enzo barked twice. They laughed and I barked twice again, faster. The feeling. The sensation, the movement, the speed, the car, the tires, the sound, the wind, the track surface, the apex, the exit, the shift point, the braking zone, the ride. It's all about the ride. There is nothing more to tell about that trip because nothing could possibly be more incredible than those few hot laps that Denny gave to me. Until that moment, I thought that I loved racing. I intellectualized that I would enjoy being in a race car. Until that moment, I didn't know. How can anyone know until he sits in a car at race speed and takes turns at the limits of adhesion, brakes, a hair from lockup, the engine begging for the red line? I floated through the rest of our trip. I dreamed of going out again at speed, but I suspected, as it turned out correctly so, that more track time for me was unlikely. Still, I had my memory, my experience, I could relive in my mind again and again. 2 barks means faster. Sometimes, to this day, in my sleep, I bark twice. Because I am dreaming of Denny and me driving around Thunder Hill, the 2 of us laying down a hot lap, and I bark twice to say faster. One more lap, Denny, faster. There you go. We have time for a few questions? We have time for a few questions, if anybody, lady in the back underneath the light.
Even in that last passage that you just read, which was beautiful, it seems like almost every chapter has some serious wisdom teachings in it. And I'm wondering, are you drawing Enzo's philosophy from a certain book or practice? And did you also use that to guide the book? Because it really is just spiritual practice.
So the question is about the sort of the spiritual nature of the messages of Enzo in the book and where they come from. You know, it's important to be, as a writer friend of mine, Stephanie Kalos says, open for business. You have to be listening. To be a writer, you always have to listen and you have to pick up things. So part of it, you know, the idea of having Denny be a race car driver, okay, I had the idea for Enzo first, of his dog, and then I've been doing race car driving myself with SCCA, Sports Car Club of America. I raced a Spec Miata for a few years, and And you know, they really do talk like this on the racetrack. You know, your car goes where your eyes go and stuff. In the military, they call it target fixation. But there really are little aphorisms that they spout about on the racetrack. And me and a couple of friends, we would joke around about it, because one of the things about race car driving is when you first go to race, you know, the chief steward takes you into the trailer and says, "I'm going to give you a lecture now." You know, first of all, they put a big neon orange thing on the back of your car. This means you're a novice, so everyone stays away from you. And then the guy says, "Look, you came here voluntarily, and we didn't ask you to come, so we can't spend our time adjudicating traffic incidents out on the racetrack. So here's the deal. Any damage that happens to your car, you pay for. And any damage that happens to the other person's car, that person pays for it. And that's it. We don't care how it happened. Doesn't matter whose fault it was. That's the deal." And you know, it makes sense, because right, and you know what, you drive differently if that's the case. If you know that number 92 gets squirrely in turn 6, guess what? You don't pass him in turn 6. You wait, you set it up and pass him in a different turn. So because I don't want to fix my car. Might be his fault, but I don't want to fix my car. You know, I guarantee you, you know why out there on the road out here, people are constantly teaching each other lessons with their big old cars, right? I mean, they're constantly doing it, and you know why they're doing it? Because they have insurance. Because someone else is paying for the damage. That's really the bottom line. If you take away car insurance, everyone's going to be a lot more careful with their car. If they have to fix their own damage. So we would joke around about this, and we'd say, you know, and one of the other things in racing is never think about something that's happened. If an incident happens on the track, forget it. Keep going. Don't worry about why it happened, how it happened. If it's your own mistake or there's something with another car, it doesn't matter. You can't change it. It's already happened. Therefore, what you need to do is get your head down the track, and you need to try and better your position. It doesn't help you to waste your energy thinking about what just happened. Only think about what you can change, which is in front of you. And so me and my buddies would say, you know, boy, if we could apply that to our lives, as you know, we'd be really good fathers and husbands, because you know, you would never get mad at anybody, because it's like, well, okay, this is where we are now. Where do we go from here? Not you know, you did that to me. We're always keeping, you know, with our loved ones. We're always, if you did this and then you made me say it, because if you hadn't said that, then I wouldn't have said it. So you know, those are kind of the ideas that I took from the racing. But in terms of sort of the spiritual stuff, you know, it just comes, I think it's in the air in this day and age. You know, I think that the whole dawning of the age of Aquarius in the 60s, I think they were a little early. I mean, I think really now we're dawning, you know, the idea that we were all connected and we all have, you know, be not just responsible for ourselves, but for the good of each other as well. So I think that's out there, and I have 3 kids. I have an 18-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 7-year-old, and it's important to, we're not religious, my wife and I are not religious in any way, but we are spiritual. We think they have a good spiritual background, which is similar to the philosophies in Enzo. So I can't tell you where they came from specifically, they came. You know, I get a little weird when you start talking about characters and stuff, because writing is a mystical process for me. You know, there's an art, for me, there's an art and a science. I mean, I'm sorry, an art and a craft. So the craft is the stuff, the technique, and the stuff that you can learn. Word choice, plot, character, you know, also we get really specific about a lot of things. Pattern, you know, pattern recognition, you know. We can spend a lot of time. And you can devote all your time to the craft of it, and it can be pretty good. But the books that really like ascend are the ones that have that something that you don't know where it came from. That inspiration. When Ayrton Senna, the famous race car driver, would race, you know, he always said, he wrote books about how he did these things, and he wanted to learn the techniques of race car driving so well that he didn't ever think about driving the car. It just was an automatic thing, which would free his mind up to be creative with the other stuff on the track. And in fact, there's, he has a whole speech that he gave, commentary about feeling like he was floating above a race car one year when he was qualifying in Monaco. And he actually felt that he was above watching himself drive. And oddly enough, he out-qualified. The next closest qualifier was 2 seconds behind him. That's a lot. In Formula One, where they win by, they measure in thousands of seconds. So that's a lot. So he was doing something right. So I do think that there's a time where that you get it. And that stuff happens. And with this book in particular, with The Art of Racing in the Rain, for sure, Enzo came. and said, here's my story, you're going to be the one to tell it. And then my job isn't then to come make up stuff. My job is to then be responsible to the story and to his messages and what forth, so that it comes across to the audience. So I don't betray that in any way. Yes, sir?
What you make a movie out of it? What happened?
The question about the movie. Yes. So, yes, you know, it's at Universal. It's in development. They have a script. We have a director, and probably best that's all I leave it at that. You know, it's Hollywood, and I can't see. It's unfortunate, and in hindsight, I would have done it differently. But you know, look, like I said, my book I wrote before this sold 1,200 copies. That's not a lot of copies, you know. So I was a little overwhelmed. They said, "Hey, look, let's look at this deal." And you know, you sit there at a table with my agent sitting next to me, and people from Hollywood on the other side. And they write down a number on a piece of paper and slide it across. I say, "What does this mean?" My agent says, "They wonder how much your integrity is worth." And I say, no, that's not, no. And so then you push the paper back, and we do this a few times, and then there's a number, and then you say, well, I got 3 kids, got to go to college, and you know, it's my integrity. So we'll see. I have high hopes. It may never get made, but it may get made. They can start shooting it this summer, as far as I know. I hope they fix the script. Yes, sir.
Who influences you as a writer?
Who influences me as a writer? It's interesting. That's a way better way to phrase it than who is your favorite writer, because that's like the hardest question in the world to ask. Who's influenced me? Obviously, the Northwest, Ken Kesey, Northwest writer. You know, sometimes a great notion. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I think he's brilliant. I love magical realism, so I love the magical realists. Including my new big favorite is Carlos Ruiz Zafón, Spanish guy. Fabulous. If you haven't read Prisoner of Heaven, and he's got 3 books. I can never get their title straight. Is that Shadow of the Wind, Prisoner of Heaven, and there's another one. They're great, really great. They take place in Barcelona in the 40s, in the Franco era, and it's really quite wonderful. And there's magical realism in there. Interestingly, when I was young, I was really into the theater, and so a lot of the reading I did when I was a teenager and stuff were plays. So I feel highly influenced by the playwrights such as Eugene O'Neill, a personal favorite, and Tennessee Williams. Fabulous writer, and you read his plays, you get just as, you know, it's great to see a performance, obviously, but his plays are written so well, and the stage structures, everything's done so wonderfully, you just should read them. I really love reading the theater. One more, yes?
Who wrote your movie script? Could you participate in writing your script?
Who wrote the movie script and could I participate? No, they didn't want me. All right, I'll tell you what happened. Let me tell you what happened. Okay, so they wrote this script, see, and I was like, you guys, no. And I stomped my feet and I jumped up and down, and then and I said, this is a real problem. And then I got a telephone call from the CEO of Universal. And he said, we need to have lunch. And I was like, I'm in Seattle. He's like, you come to LA to have lunch. I was like, why not just a phone call? And he's like, no, this is how we do things in Hollywood. I say, that's part of the inefficiency in the system. So I flew down and I had lunch with him, and it was, oh, wonderful. Oh, no, we're going to rework it, we're redoing it, we're getting the director involved, it's going to be all just what you want, don't worry, we don't want you happy. I said, great. Time passes, 9 months go by, and then I get another phone call. We've hired a director. He wants to have dinner with you. And I said, I'm not flying down to LA for dinner. But he said, oh, no, we're going to send him up to you in Seattle. So, very nice guy, Tom Bazooka. And we talked on the phone a little bit. He says, I'm going to come up, we're going to have a whole sit down about the script. I said, great. My wife was my first editor, she's going to be at dinner with us. And then we get to talking, and I said, Tom, have you ever been to a car race? And he says, no. I said, you ever been to a racetrack? He said, no. I said, you ever break the speed limit? He said, not really. So I said, can you take an earlier flight? So he did. He came up early, and I picked him up at the airport, and I took him down to Pacific Raceways, which is our racetrack in Kent, and I had Don Kitch waiting for him. Don Kitch is the guy who runs, he's a character in the book. He runs the racing school out of Pacific, And he gave Tom an hour-and-a-half lecture on car dynamics and vehicle dynamics and all what racing is all about. And then he put him in a souped-up BMW M3 and took him out for hot laps. And Tom got out of the car with a big grin on his face, which is what happens when you're doing a hot. No matter what, you always have a grin on your face after you get out of a race car. And so then I took him around and we saw all sorts of wonderful locations in Seattle where the book takes place. You know, the Lakeview Cemetery where you know Brandon Lee and Bruce Lee are buried. We're there, and Eve. Little fiction. I took him all over the place, and then we went all over Seattle, and then I took him to drop him off at his hotel so he could get ready to freshen up for dinner. And as I dropped him off at his hotel, I said, "Hey Tom, okay, we'll see you in a couple hours at the restaurant." I said, "Just you keep one thing in mind." I said, "You know the whole good cop, bad cop thing?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Yeah, I'm the good cop." So we went to dinner, and my wife let him have it. She did not hold back. And midway through dinner, I looked over at Tom. He's got this look on his face, and I'm like, "Oh, dude, I told you, man." And he's like, "Look," I said, I totally understand it. I totally agree. You know, this is the business, and I have many masters, so I have to try and please everybody. But I will strive to make this a film that you will be proud of. So we'll see if it happens. Tom's a great guy. I have faith in him. If anybody can do it, Tom can do it. Yes, ma'am. Last question.
When you first wrote the book, on Racing in the Rain, what type of dog did you intend Enzo to be?
Ah, famous. What kind of dog do you intend Enzo to be? Question. Yes. So there's always this question of, oh, he's not a golden retriever, and he's not a this, because of the cover of the book.
Yes.
Right. The cover of the book was intended to be every dog.
Oh.
I deliberately left Enzo vague because I think people want to picture their own dog. So we don't know much about Enzo. We know that Enzo's mother was a lab, right? He says he's part water dog on his mother's side. And Enzo isn't quite sure who his father is. He thinks it's some Airedale. And I put that in for a real specific reason because, you know, the more I think about it, you know, do any of us really know who our father is? I mean, do you really know? There was that guy standing in the kitchen in his pajama bottoms drinking the coffee, and you called him Dad, but have you ever done the DNA test? I wanted to kind of bring that up in the book. But you know, what's interesting about what happened with the cover is, now it's in 35 languages, right? And so every culture has a different interpretation of Enzo. So in Japan, it's a little kind of sad little yellow dog. In England, it's a dachshund. I don't get that. In Czech Republic, it's a big black Eastern block dog. So I have to tell you one funny story about the paperback of, so you know the paperback of Enzo with the dog is looking out? That's the most popular one. And then the hardcover is this one? So in the hardcover, the idea was to make it look like a wind tunnel, like a car in a wind tunnel. Yeah, I didn't get it either. But when it came time to do the paperback, they said, well, we want to have the dog looking out because we think that's going to be more appealing to people. We don't want a dog looking out. I said, that's a great idea. So they put a dog on there, and it was just the dog. It was a horrible, atrocious dog. It was awful. I said to my wife, I said, what do you think of this? She's like, I like the idea, but it's a terrible dog. Get rid of that dog. So I said, called my editor. I said, get rid of the dog. Find a different dog. They said, okay. So they go off for 3 weeks. They're searching. They're scouring for a dog. They call me up. They say, we can't find a dog. I say to my wife, they can't find a dog. She's like, oh, God, really? So she goes on the internet and starts doing her own searches. And she gets on Flickr, and she finds a photographer who's just getting started in Denver, Colorado. And she's just trying to get her portfolio built up, so she's taking pictures of her friends and her friends' relatives and her friends' cats and her friends' dogs. And in this young woman's profile of her webpage, there's a picture of this dog like looking over a bed, like poking his head over. And she's like, a dog should be a dog like that. So she cuts it out, and she does a whole mock-up. And does a Xerox of it and hands it to me, and she says, tell them it should be a dog like that. And I said, you're right. It should. So I sent it into Harper. I said, it should be a dog like that. And 2 weeks later, they call me up and they're like, we can't find a dog like that. There's no dog like that. So I look at my wife and I say, sorry, honey, they can't find a dog. And she's like, are you kidding me? Use that dog. And so I called up and I said, are you just kidding? Use that dog. And so they did. They called up the lady and they said, can we use the dog? And she said, are you kidding? I'll ask my neighbor. Neighbor, can they put your dog on 4 million books? And it's really cute because the dog is named Buddy. And Buddy lives in Denver, and Buddy comes to visit me when I do readings at the Tattered Cover. So, I'm going to stop now because it's warm and it's taking a long time. But I'm going to sign books, and y'all can get some cool refreshments. And thank you all for coming out. I really do appreciate it.
We're going to line up over there for signing books, and if everyone brings their
nature of literature, of keeping the idea of the written word alive. You know, in this day and age, there's a lot of stuff that's distracting. I don't know if any of you have kids, but you may have noticed that they spend a lot of time not reading. So it's good to try and engage them in some way, and hopefully by modeling reading with them, reading next to them, reading alongside them, discussing what they're reading, hopefully that we can bring them into the fold, and they can also be literature lovers. You know, it's really important to remember that our society, our culture, our communities are based on dialogue. They're based on an exchange of ideas. They're based on civil discourse, right? Agreeing to disagree. Not everybody in this room has the exact same opinion about anything, nor does anyone have the exact same opinion about any given book, right? So a book is kind of a microcosm of our society. And so what do? We come together, we exchange ideas, we agree to disagree, we have civil discourse. And through that civil discourse, we get to improve our communities. We make changes, we tweak things as we go along. Because we listen to what the other people have to say, and we say, I respect your opinion, I have to respectfully disagree, I think it's more like this. And then we come together in some kind of a happy medium in the middle that maybe it doesn't make everybody happy, but makes everybody satisfied. And that's how our world should work. If we don't have that, you know what we end up with, of course, the federal government. Well, we don't need them if they're not going to listen to each other. We don't need them. I could have nobody not listen to each other. I mean, that's easy. We certainly would save a lot of money on their mileage that they overbill us for. So I think we need to encourage our politicians as well to open up dialogue and not just shut their ears and not be open to at least having a respectful discussion about a given situation. I think that happens in places like libraries and bookstores, because I'm selfish, I'm a writer. Obviously, I think everything is about me. As my wife would say, she said, you only like parties if they're about you. Which is absolutely true. But I think that I put everything in the light of books and literature because that's what I do. But I think that we need to make sure that our libraries are vibrant parts of our communities, providing programming like this, as well as many other programs, as you know, the Camarillo Library offers. Not just lending books, but all sorts of programming for all sorts of different kinds of people. Our bookstores don't just make an economic transaction for a book. They're also adding to the discourse. They are providing also their own public programming. They have story time for kids. They bring in authors from out of town. And just provoking you by asking you to read maybe something a little different. Don't read the same thing over and over again. Try stretching a little bit. And in these places, we need to make sure that our libraries and our bookstores remain vibrant parts of our main streets. And I'm sure all of you, I'm preaching to the choir here, obviously, although none of you probably can sing very well. But I know you're here, and that's good, but continue to support your libraries and your local bookstores. Okay, enough with my lecture. Sorry about that. I get excited. Other things, other bits of news. I have other news. Oh yes, first of all, hold on. There's always business to take care of before we start. Okay. Y'all are going to be on Facebook later on. So. Friend me, follow me, like me. Another little bit of news here. This is called an iPad. If you push on, look, there's a picture of me climbing a redwood tree last summer. That's my screensaver thing, lock screen. On this, I'm going to have it when I'm signing afterwards. If you want to put yourself on my mailing list, you can do so. Every couple of months, I send out a newsletter. It has like little tidbits of information, such as, did you know recently we sold the Reader's Digest translation of The Art of Racing in the Rain in Slovakia. So if any of you have family in the old country with short attention spans, they too can enjoy The Art of Racing in the Rain. And you would know this if you signed up, if you're on my newsletter. You get this. But it's fun. We have little tidbits of information, little things, and we're trying to do a game every couple months. We try and do like a little contest where you answer the trivia question and then go into the hat. The name goes into the hat, and we pull a name out, and I'll do a 30-minute Skype with your book club, if you'd like. And if you don't have a book club, I'll still Skype. It's cool. I've done it before. You open a bottle of wine on your end, and I open a bottle of wine. We have a virtual glass of wine together. It's fun. It's good. Anyway, so you can go into if you sign up for my newsletter, you'll be entered into this contest. And it's fun. I always enjoy doing it. And so do that if you'd like. And finally, I'm going to talk. Yeah, I'm going to get to that. Okay, good. I don't know. I think that's it. All right, thank you all for coming. Gestures are all that I have. Sometimes they must be grand in nature. And while I occasionally step over the line and into the world of the melodramatic, it is what I must do in order to communicate clearly and efficiently, in order to make my point understood without question. I have no words I can rely on, because much to my dismay, my tongue was designed long and flat and loose, and therefore is a horribly ineffective tool for pushing food around my mouth while chewing, and an even less effective tool for making clever and complicated polysyllabic sounds that can be linked together to form sentences. And that's why I'm here now, waiting for Denny to come home. He should be here soon, lying on the cool tiles of the kitchen floor in a puddle of my own urine. I'm old. And while I'm very capable of getting older, that's not the way I want to go out. Shot full of pain medication and steroids to reduce the swelling of my joints, vision fogged with cataracts, puffy, plasticky packages of doggy pens stocked in the pantry. I'm sure Denny would get me one of those little wagons I've seen on the streets, the ones that cradle the hindquarters so a dog can drag his ass behind him when things start to fail. That's humiliating and degrading. I'm not sure it's worse than dressing up a dog for Halloween, but it's close. He would do it out of love, of course. I'm sure he would keep me alive as long as he possibly could. My body deteriorating, disintegrating around me, dissolving until there's nothing left but my brain floating in a glass jar filled with clear liquid, my eyeballs drifting at the surface, and all sorts of cables and tubes feeding what remains. But I don't want to be kept alive, because I know what's next. I've seen it on TV, a documentary I saw about Mongolia, of all places. It was the best thing I've ever seen on television, other than the 1993 Grand Prix of Europe, of course. The greatest automobile race of all time, in which Ayrton Senna proved himself to be a genius in the rain. After the 1993 Grand Prix, the best thing I've ever seen on TV is a documentary that explained everything to me, made it all clear, told the whole truth. When a dog is finished living his lifetimes as a dog, his next incarnation will be as a man. So that's how it starts. That's how it starts. And as many of you have read the book, you've figured out by now it's narrated from a dog's point of view. And people always say, well, where'd you come up with this idea? So I'm going to take the liberty of asking the question for you. Now, first, if I may praise you on an astute question. Thank you for asking. I grew up in Seattle. I went to New York to go to school, and I stayed in New York for 18 years. And my wife and me and two of my kids at that time, because one of them was not alive yet, because he was yet to be conceived. We moved back to Seattle in 2001. While I was living in New York, I did a lot of different kinds of jobs. You know how it is after you get out of college and stuff like that. But for a number of years, I made documentary films. And at a certain point in my documentary film career, a film came across my desk. And it was a very wonderful film. It was called State of Dogs. And it was made in Mongolia. It was about the belief among the nomadic people in Mongolia that the next incarnation for their dog will be as a person. And I really loved the film. I didn't get involved with it for a number of reasons, but I really enjoyed it. And I thought, you know, one day I want to do something with that idea. But I had no idea how to do it. So years passed, and I was at a poetry reading in Seattle by the poet Billy Collins. Any of you familiar with Billy Collins? He's terrific, right? Yeah, he really is a great poet. If he comes to town, or if you have a chance to see him live, you really have to go. He has a great presentation. He's very kind of a droll sense of humor. He's kind of looks a little nerdy. He actually looks like a really tall Bob Newhart. All right, anybody who laughed is officially old. Just saying. And his poems are very fun, and they're kind of sweet, and there's always a twist at the end of them. And so he was reading one of his poems that night from a collection called The Trouble with Poetry. And the poem was called The Revenant, which means words from the dead. So it's being told from the point of view of a dog who's recently been euthanized. So it's being narrated from doggy heaven. And the first line of the poem is this: I am the dog you put to sleep, as you like to call the needle of oblivion. Come back to tell you this simple thing. I never liked you. That's funny, right? It gets better. I want to see, one of you has to be the first one to run out and find, they probably have one copy of Trouble with Poetry in the stacks in the library. So check it out and read the rest of the poem, because it's really worth it. But when I was sitting in the Benaroya Symphony Hall where they were doing this event, there were a lot of people there, and everyone was just hysterical over this poem. And I think that's it. That's how you tell that story. The idea of a dog being reincarnated as a person, it can only be told from the dog's point of view. And the dog's really frustrated. And he's, you know, I'm the smartest person in the room, he thinks, except my tongue doesn't form words, and so no one listens to me, and I don't have thumbs, so I can't turn doorknobs and go wherever I want to go. If I had those two things, I could rule the world. I'd be better than everybody. Thus, the idea of Enzo was born. So, this was the summer of 2006, and I was doing a lot of touring for my second, The University of the Rain, it's my third novel. Yes, I wrote 2 books that you don't even know about before I wrote The Art of Racing in the Rain. And so I was touring for my second book, How Evan Broke His Head and Other Secrets, available at all fine independent booksellers. And in those days, you know, I would go, I mean, when you're touring for a book, it was a small press, Soho Press published it, and no one really cared about it or knew who I was. And so, you know, you always had to bring books with me in the trunk of my car, because sometimes the bookstores just wouldn't have them. So I would go do readings for any bookstore that would have me. I do readings for like 2, 3, 4 people at a time, you know, and how life changes, you know. And but that's what I did. I spent most of that summer driving around from bookstore to bookstore around Oregon, Washington, Montana, Iowa. I was going all over the place doing this stuff. And it's about, you know, building relationships and stuff, not necessarily selling books. At least that's what I told my wife. And we fool ourselves sometimes in a desperate hope to cling to some sort of self-respect. Sorry. Yes, I was touring around a little bit, and it was kind of fun. And my wife, she said to me one day, I came back from a stint in Central Oregon, and she said to me, I understand you're doing this book tour stuff, and you go out, and every night I see your schedule, and I see like articles in the local papers and all that stuff, so I know you're doing events, but what do you do all day? And I said, well, you know. And she said, I think you go see movies during the day. And then she produced the ticket stub that she found in my jacket pocket, because that's exactly what I was doing. It was kind of fun. I would we had 2 little kids, sometimes it's good to get away. And I would go and pull into whatever town and check into my hotel, and then I'd go for a walk by the river, because all towns have rivers, and then I'd get a little light lunch, and I'd go to the movie theater. I'd catch a movie that R-rated usually, that I couldn't take my kids to, and then I'd go do my event, and then I'd drive to the next town the next day. It was kind of a cushy life. And at that point, she said to me, you need to take your laptop. You need to work. You're not allowed to do that. And so at this point, I have to introduce you to my wife. She's not here. She's at home with the kids. I have to introduce you to the idea of my wife. Every writer will tell you that his or her spouse is his muse. My wife is my greatest confidant. She's my first reader. She's my best editor. She's my staunchest supporter. She's with me when times aren't so good. She's there to share the joy when times are great. She really is my muse. But before you get all like gushy on the muse thing, she's not like a muse like you would see in a Renaissance painting, like long gown and little wings and hovering over my desk, sprinkling pixie dust on my keyboard. If you want to think of my wife as muse, you got to kind of go a little darker than that, like S&M dominatrix muse. Black leather, the whole deal. Get back in your office and don't come out until you finish your chapter. So you get the idea, right? So I said to her, I was really excited about this idea, because suddenly I was working on a different book, and I had this idea. I said, I got to drop it. I got to drop that idea, because I got this. There's a dog. See, the dog, and he's then he's going to have race cars, and I was so excited, and she said to me what any good dominatrix muse would say. She said, no. No, she says, that's not the way it works. You finish the book you're working on, then you get to write a new book. That's the system, see? You can't just drop anything willy-nilly. And I said, oh, please, I begged and I pleaded. And so finally she said, okay, you can try the dog book. And I was going on a trip for 4 days, again, down to Oregon. And she said, you go on this trip, you can try the dog book. Take your laptop. I want to see 40 pages with you. That's a lot of pages. And so here I went to Bend, Oregon, and I checked into the Riverside Lodge, and I opened up my laptop, and I said, doggy, you better be ready. And the first sentence came to me, gestures are all that I have. Sometimes they must be grand in nature. And I was like, I got it. And I just started writing and writing and writing. Fast forward 4 months later, I had finished the first draft of The Art of Racing. Never written that fast before. I had never written that fast before. I was very excited about it. I sent it off to my agent in New York, and I waited for him to call. This was in November of 2006. I sent it to my agent. You know how authors wait for their agent to call? Yeah. So I have a dog, Comet. Comet is our dog. Comet's favorite food is pancakes. Comet loves pancakes. And on Sundays when I'm home, I make pancakes. Sundays are pancake days for the kids, and I make all the pancakes, and everybody eats them. And then the leftover pancakes are on the counter, on the little cooling rack there. And Comet guards those pancakes. She's really afraid there's been some break-ins in our neighborhood, that someone's going to break in and steal the pancakes. So she stands underneath them, and she stares at them. And every now and then she does one of these. Right? You'll have dogs, right? You know that they do that. They're like, you see me, you see what I'm doing. I'm guarding those. So I know deep in her psyche, she's thinking, if I stare at those pancakes long enough and hard enough, one of them is going to fly off that rack. That's how an author looks at his cell phone after sending a manuscript off to his book. Did I miss it? Did I miss it? And then you start getting those, oh, you guys know this one. You ever get those phantom calls? Like your phone starts buzzing in your pocket. You're like, oh yeah, definitely. Oh, nobody. So I was waiting like that, desperately for my agent to call. And I remember the date specifically. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving in 2006. And I remember it so clearly because, I'll tell you why. As I said, I lived in New York for a long time, and then we moved back to Seattle. So my wife is from New York. And so my in-laws are still there. They didn't move with us. That's part of why we moved. They had been out to visit a few times, but they'd never come for a big family festival. And so I do all the Thanksgiving cooking, so it was just a big moment for me. My in-laws were coming into town that afternoon, and I had to do a really good dinner for them because my parents were going to be there too. It was going to be a big family thing. And I had to prove to them that I hadn't actually abducted their daughter and grandchildren, but they had come willingly, and that they were thriving in Seattle, and they loved the area. Everyone was doing great. So I really had a lot to show, right? And so I was to do this. I was going into the Whole Foods on Roosevelt Way in Seattle to pick up my organic game hen. Nothing is too good for my mother-in-law. And I was going in and my phone rang, and I looked at it, the caller ID was my agent. And I said, well, this is just brilliant timing, because my in-laws are coming in this afternoon. In addition to them seeing how great we're all doing here, my agent's about to tell me he loves my book, so it's more to talk about. And so I answered the phone right away, and I said, what'd you think? And my agent said to me, it's narrated by a dog. And I said, yes, I actually know that. Having written it. And he said to me, I said to him, what'd you think of the book? And he said to me, no one's going to read a book narrated by a dog. No publisher will publish a book narrated by a dog. No marketing department would know how to market a book narrated by a dog. It's not even narrated by a dog, he said. It's narrated by an author pretending to be a dog. To which I said, Victor Hugo was not a hunchback. He didn't get the joke. I don't think he likes the French people or something. I don't know. But he didn't get the joke. He just went on and on and on at great length, lecturing me about the state of the industry, about what a disaster this was, about my third novel is crucially important because no one's going to listen to me after this. And I was ruining my career, and worse, I was taking him down with me. And he ended his diatribe by saying, do me a favor. Take this book and throw it away and go write me something I can sell. I don't know. These two words just popped into my head. Not those words. Although they were probably in my head as well. No, two other words, more G-rated. I said, and I just said that. I just couldn't help myself. I just said, you're fired. So I fired my agent. Let me give you a little bit of advice. I'm sure we have writers out here. I'm sure of it. So if you're working on your third novel, and let's say your first novel's got nice reviews, maybe even won an award or so, you know, but they didn't sell a whole lot of copies. And let's say you're working on your third novel, and it's told from an alternative point of view. Like, for instance, it's narrated by a dog. And let's say you're going to get in a fight with your agent over that, and you're going to fire your agent, and it's the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and your in-laws are coming into town for a great big Thanksgiving feast. It's best not to tell your spouse about that until after. I'm sure you understand the nuances. Still, we got through it okay. We got through the weekend okay, and the following Monday I started sending my book out right away to other agents to try and get a new agent. And I kept getting the same thing over and over and over again. They just said the same thing. They said, we like the writing, we like the idea, but it's narrated by a dog. We don't know how to sell this book. We don't know, no one's going to read this book. We don't know what to do. And I didn't know, I was flabbergasted. I thought, am I really that out of touch? How weird. And so months went by of this same over and over again.